Okay, so this will probably be a quicker episode of Mr. K is Wrong. And just to explain what this little podcast is about, it's about a person that I used to know in high school who was a Republican, but of course, over the years, he's gone further and further down a far right rabbit hole. And I'm here to debunk a lot of his ridiculous talking points that he typically posts in meme format on Facebook. And, it's just embarrassing. There was one episode where he basically posted a, I don't know how to say it, just an anti Semitic meme. And I had a few former neo Nazis on my show as a guest to explain, just how bad the meme was. And that's probably the best episode of this podcast so far. But this time it's going to be a little bit more moderate than that. I'm going to be looking at how Mr. K overlooks the reasons why Joe Biden pardoned his family members. So he posted a meme featuring House Speaker Mike Johnson, the neo-fascist Ned Flanders, saying, "If they weren't the Biden crime family, why do they need pardons?" So I actually don't know if that's a direct quote from Speaker Mike Johnson, because a lot of these memes, they just make things up. So that might not even be something that Mike Johnson actually said. But putting that aside, it's a meme. And for a lot of these people, if they see it online, it must be true. So that question is there. Why did Joe Biden pardon his family members? Well, I mean, there are some fairly obvious reasons. You know, the statement refers to President Joe Biden's preemptive pardons of several family members, including his brothers James and Francis, and his sister Valerie Biden Owens, and their spouses. So, for some people who don't really understand the context of that, they might overlook the fact that Donald Trump has promised to go after his quote unquote political opponents with the power of, these investigations and whatnot. And that's whether or not they have actually committed crimes, you know. So these pardons were issued ostensibly to protect them from potential investigations by the incoming administration. Well, it's no longer incoming, but at the time this meme was posted, it was an incoming administration. So, yeah, the promise that they were going to be investigated was one of the reasons why somebody might, you know, pardon them if they could. It's not exactly that tricky to figure it out, right? So the preemptive pardons do not necessarily imply guilt or criminal activity under those circumstances, especially. Historically, keep in mind, such pardons have been used as protective measures against potential politically motivated prosecutions. For example, President Gerald Ford granted a preemptive pardon to former President Richard Nixon to prevent a prolonged legal battle. Now, there are reasons to question that. It did set what many view as a bad precedent of not holding presidents accountable. And, I would even agree that he should have been investigated further. But nevertheless, history is history. That's what happened. So the point is that this is actually an established pattern, and this really just fits in well with the pattern that we've all known for quite a while now, and that Donald Trump himself has actually clearly benefited from. So it's a little bit odd for anybody who is in a position of power like the Trumps or the Bidens to complain about this same premise, this same pattern that is letting them off the hook. And that's really there to protect people in privilege and power positions. So, in this context, Biden's pardons were perhaps intended to shield his family from anticipated investigations by the new administration, which he perceived as partisan attacks based on unfounded allegations. And it's one of those things where I could understand that. I mean, the promise was there. It was all but guaranteed that these investigations were going to happen, whether they were merited or not. Because you know what? Donald Trump is somebody who plainly just does not care about evidence. He'll just say stuff, whether it has even a shred of truth to it or not. Like of course, the infamous claim that, oh, they're eating cats and dogs in Ohio, the Haitian immigrants. Or the example that is sorely overlooked of the protester Gugino, Martin Gugino. I said Gorgino, but he was, a 75-year-old man in New York who was pushed to the ground by some a-hole cop, and it resulted in the man getting his skull fractured, and he was actually bleeding from the ear. And Donald Trump actually had the nerve to accuse him of staging his injuries, which is really a Twilight Zone level bit of freakishness from Donald Trump that he uh, just stated on Twitter as if there was any validity to it. Um, like, I mean, imagine that. Imagine getting pushed to the pavement, and you're suffering a traumatic brain injury, rush to the hospital, and then later you learn that the actual president of the United States claimed that you faked the whole thing. Like, what did he take some stage blood and like splash it over his ear? You know, was he in cahoots with the officers themselves who had pushed him? I mean, what a freak show! And that alone should have been disqualifying. And I really think more people should be bringing that incident up when it comes to, discussing how little these people regard the truth as any thing worth maintaining. This, I mean, I could go on and on about the implications of that, but I think you get the idea by this point. And it's really one of the great examples of an unfounded allegation that I think is overlooked, and people need to really focus in on that, zero in on that particular story, because it's just a bonkers example. But anyway, well, Speaker Johnson's alleged remark, again, I don't know if he actually said it or not, but it suggests that the need for pardons indicates guilt, which is odd because that's exactly what would be implied by the January 6th pardons that Donald Trump implemented. Um, I guess legally, pardons are sometimes seen as an admission of guilt, but that's that's an example of the law and not necessarily catering to the facts. Just because somebody is pardoned, I don't think it necessarily means they are guilty. And I think in this case, Biden actually made it clear that he did not believe the people that everyone he pardoned was guilty. But anyway, the use of preemptive pardons is a legal and historical mechanism, in some cases, to prevent potential misuse of the justice system for political retribution, rather than an admission of criminal behavior. Although, of course, sometimes it could be a certain element of criminal behavior. If you're pardoning somebody just as a political favor, that could be construed as legally ambiguous. Now, we live in a rotten system where you're not really allowed to challenge that ambiguity that much, but nevertheless, it's all a bunch of questionable stuff. The the whole pardon power of a president it's a little bit iffy, because you get into issues of like, was the person actually, you know, worthwhile pardoning, or is it actually just a political favor, or is it a matter of convenience of some other kind? Like is there is there something else legally shady going on? And of course, it's not like pardons are totally flawed as a concept, but it can be murky. That's my point here. And I think a lot of people are taking advantage of the murkiness of it to make it seem like, oh, somebody must inherently be guilty if they're getting a pardon. And that's not necessarily true, of course. And it's just one of those things that people should try to be a little nuanced about rather than making dumb assumptions based on Facebook memes. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and you know, go ahead and check out the other ones, and I'm sure I'll occasionally do some other future episodes as well.